All politics is identity politics. Welcome to Identity Politics, everyone. I'm DeAnna. It's been about 6 months from the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and the consensus on the American right has been more or less to decide that we are going to consciously choose defeat. That seems to be where we're at. Charlie Kirk, and this is just us talking here, right? Like, he wasn't our guy, right? He wasn't a white advocate. He certainly wasn't a white nationalist. He was not a Jared Taylor. He was not on Jared Taylor's side. But he had certainly come a long way, and he certainly wasn't anti-white by the end. And taking him out was a remarkably successful political act, let's be honest. There's been absolutely no downside for the American left, and maybe that's changing, but up till right now, I'd argue it was the most successful political act of the last 2 years. There's no mystery here about why he died. I'm not going to pretend that there's something that needs to be unpacked. It was some leftist who was screwing a troon. That's what happened. We're going to blame everybody but that, and I think there's a very simple reason for that. It's less scary than admitting the truth. A large number of people in this country celebrated it. We've talked about this before. A large number of people you have to deal with every day, nurses, teachers, government workers, they thought it was funny. They'd think it was funny if the same thing happened to you. And the reason is because they thought he was like you, even if he wasn't. They thought he was a racist, that he was a white nationalist. At the very least, he was a homophobe or a transphobe, and therefore he deserved to die. You have to deal with that. Or you can play games, and you can blame whatever thing. You can say it's Egypt or Israel or his wife or all three. And the great part about that is if you believe that, you don't have to do anything. You're not actually threatening anybody. It's so easy. It's the elite, man. It's the Epstein class, man. Yeah, well, who's that? Notice if you try to break it down to anything specific that might get you in trouble, that might require political follow-up, the targets change. Oh, I just mean it's like the Frankists. I'm not talking about I just mean the Frankists. Yeah, all right, fine. Whatever. You're not saying anything at all, and there's nothing to be done but keep watching. It's the same grift as faith healing or talking about aliens or whatever else because it's completely unfalsifiable. There's no evidence or possible event that can prove any of these stupid theories wrong. So in other words, there's nothing to talk about. And I can't help but notice that the same people who have all sorts of bold, truth-telling explanations about what really happened to Charlie Kirk, they're the same people who wet themselves when ICE agents started arresting people. Because fundamentally, it's not just that they don't want to win, they don't want to fight. To win, you have to actually fight the other side. You actually have to acknowledge that there is a fight, that there is another side, that it's not just the elite versus us, man. And that may suck because then people might get mad at you. So it's easier to blame it on everyone and no one. And of course, why do anything if you're on the right? If this is how people think. Some leftist pops up, shoots you, your side is going to spend the next 6 months saying that your wife did it. So better to argue about religion or AI hoaxes or crypto scams or whatever stupid thing. That's how you make your living. Now, I think it is actually quite simple. At some level, I think everybody even knows this. Right and left are meaningful categories. They are real. The left is stronger in this country. Why? Because their hatreds are stronger. Their will to power is stronger. Their sense of self-righteousness is stronger. They are willing to manipulate whatever procedural outcomes to take out whatever political enemies by any means necessary. That's what you have to deal with. That is the truth. I'm not going to lie to you. There's no easy way to win. There's no way out but through. And if you don't want to deal with that, if you want to serve people nonsense about, oh, it's the system, man, or it's this undefinable enemy that we can do nothing about, yeah, you can pose as some great truth teller, but you aren't actually, you're not risking anything. It's just a harmless tangent. And look, I understand everybody has to make a living, but at that point, it just becomes entertainment. And it's not just me saying this or being like, the left, the libtards are so different from us. No. What I am saying in full consciousness is that they are psychologically built different, and this makes them more effective. Interesting new paper in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin finds liberals and conservatives see different victims. Moral disagreement is explained by different assumptions of vulnerability. Now, this is a big paper, but I'll summarize it real quick. The authors note, quote, Everyone cares about protecting vulnerable entities from harm, but people make different assumptions about who is especially vulnerable to victimization, unquote. In other words, it's not really true, because you've heard this before, it's not really true that conservatives and liberals value different things. Like, oh, liberals value fairness, conservatives value purity or something like that. No, that's actually not true. That idea is called like moral foundations theory. It doesn't really hold up. What's actually happening is that people have different ways of seeing who is a victim. And not surprisingly, these are tied to group markers, status markers, and identity. What have I said in the past? Moral judgments tend to be the after-the-fact rationalizations. So, what does the study find? Quote, the current findings align with the view that moral foundations are better understood as post hoc groupings of moral rhetoric, rather than as basic cognitive building blocks. Foundations summarize patterns in how some groups, at one specific time and place, justify moral positions and signal social identity, but they do not appear to describe how moral judgments are generated in the mind, unquote. At the risk of oversimplifying all this, it's all downstream from identity. And liberals have a stronger belief in identity as valuable, in telling you who is vulnerable and who is not, who can be harmed and who cannot, who is deserving of sympathy and empathy and who is not. Quote, a central finding of this work is that liberals and conservatives differ in how they allocate moral concern. Liberals tend to see some targets as especially vulnerable to harm, and others as relatively invulnerable, whereas conservatives tend to see vulnerability as more evenly distributed. When plotted, this pattern closely resembles classic figures from the MFT, moral foundations theory, literature, depicting ideological differences in moral judgment, with a larger gap for liberals between harm fairness and loyalty authority purity, and a smaller gap between these clusters for conservatives. This graphical similarity is not accidental. Both approaches seek to describe the same moral divide, but AOVs, assumptions of vulnerability, do so parsimoniously. The real moral disagreement among people today is not about who really cares about authority or loyalty, or who invokes these keywords in speeches. Instead, moral disagreements arise from differences in who people perceive as especially vulnerable in society, who seems most vulnerable to victimhood, and who is a legitimate recipient of harm. Importantly, embracing AOVs and a harm-based mind does not require rejecting moral pluralism. Both morality and harm are plural. The current paper reveals many different potential victims and clusters of victims that people disagree about. So what does all that mean? What is the takeaway? It's actually quite simple, and I think your ordinary everyday experience is going to back me up on this. Liberals see certain groups as inherently vulnerable, as inherently victims, and others as inherently exploitative, inherently oppressors. So, for example, most obvious, you have to believe, to be a heckin' decent human being, you have to believe that blacks cannot be racist. Why? Because blacks, by definition, cannot have institutional power. Therefore, if you have a case where, say, a black mayor of a city fires a white city worker because he's white, that's not a legitimate thing to talk about. That's not an abuse of power. There is no victim. It's not an issue. You have to believe that. And most people who matter, not us, people who matter, people who have institutional power, do believe that. And more than that, you have to believe certain people just don't have agency. They can't be held responsible, right, for anything. And this isn't just theory. This is like in courts. Some black guy with schizophrenia who kills a white woman on a subway, he knows enough to avoid the targets that might be able to fight back, but he can't possibly know that killing people is wrong. We just have to let him go. This is actually how the law works. And once that model is established, once you have that cognitive pattern in your head that this is how you're going to view reality, whatever new specific information comes along, it's not going to break it. Cognitive dissonance is the thing. It doesn't even register, and people just go forward with it. Now, the difference, conservatives are in some ways the actual liberals. They tend to look at these sorts of cases from an individual basis. What are the specifics? What's going on in this case? You can't automatically assume who's the good guy or the bad guy, and that's why we lose. Maybe that's morally correct. Maybe that's even classical liberalism or whatever, but it's politically ineffective. It's not a good storyline. People need to automatically know who is good, who is bad, not think about it, and they want to feel justified in using violence against enemies. I don't like that, but that's the way politics actually works. I mean, let's look at a silly example. Let's look at what's going on in pop culture right now. The actor Michael B. Jordan just picked up an Oscar for the movie Sinners, which is basically just a race-swapped version of From Dusk Till Dawn, only now it ends in a heroic massacre of white people who, of course, are all in the Klan. Now, you've seen this before. It's the same movie they make over and over again. And they probably gave him this Oscar out of pity because some guy with Tourette's at some other award show called him a hard R and he cried. But there is a larger point here. This is slop, yeah, but it's the slop that gasses up the great and the good. It's agitprop, yeah, but it feels profound. People with postgraduate degrees are writing essays about how this is striking back against privilege and whatever else. And, subconsciously, obviously, this is incitement, and it's intended to be incitement. Because when you're feeding this kind of stuff to the most violent and low impulse control part of the population, yeah, you know what you're trying to have happen. But let's leave that aside for now. Oh, and by the way, who won Best Picture? A film we discussed before, One Battle After Another, which is basically a love letter to Antifa, anti-racist freedom fighters.
Get on your fucking knees. Now!
Get your noses in the carpet. My name is Jungle Pussy. This is what power looks like. See my face? This some set it off shit. I don't want you. I just want your money. Your money pays for my artillery, my supplies, my transportation, my dynamite, my message. I am what black power looks like. See my face? See my face? I'm the Prince 75.
Who is the enemy in this movie? An evil government ruled by a secret white nationalist conspiracy with the nefarious plan of deporting illegal immigrants to further racial purification.
Have you ever knowingly engaged in any acts of terrorism against this country?
No, sir.
Have you ever engaged in an interracial relationship?
No, sir.
And you are American born by Gentile?
Yes, sir.
It really is just getting worse, isn't it? This is the best entertainment industry could do. I can't wait till all these people get replaced. The people who have cultural power in this country think this is real cultural criticism. They're really impressed with themselves for this. Antifa are being lionized, their struggle is legitimized, there was no major crackdown in the real world. I mean, even Hassan Piker was at the Oscars. He's showing up there last night. I mean, I get that I'm giving you guys some rightoid slop right now. I get it. But let's make the obvious point. If any of this stuff meant anything, if any of, it's the socialism and we're fighting against the elite, it's about class, man. It's about inequality, man. It's about the idle rich. Wouldn't you want to storm the Vanity Fair Oscars party with pitchforks and burn it to the ground rather than pose for photographers? Doesn't this picture by itself just mean that this entire movement is just bullshit? Isn't that just it? That's your radical movement. The most milquetoast, wimpy, limp-wristed college Republican on a campus faces more opposition, more institutional power, more threats of violence in a year than any one of these socialists have faced in their entire lives. None of these Antifa, none of these people have ever faced consequences in their entire lives. Until now. Something did just happen. Something that has never happened before. And though many in the press are understandably a bit hesitant to talk about it because their friends are in trouble, we are going to talk about it. Because for the first time, Antifa was put on trial, facing federal charges. In a case we discussed a bit before, 9 members of a Texas Antifa group that attacked an ICE station were put on trial for terrorism. and they were convicted. Andy Ngo, who has built a career out of reporting on these people, says, quote, all members of Texas Antifa cell convicted in first federal terrorism trial. 9 defendants accused of a July 4th, 2025 ambush on a Texas ICE facility face charges including providing support to terrorists and attempted murder of federal officers. A federal jury in Fort Worth, Texas has convicted all 9 members of a North Texas Antifa cell in the first federal Antifa terrorism trial in U.S. history. The verdict followed 2 full days of deliberations after a trial that lasted 12 days. Benjamin Song, Cameron Arnold, a Trantifa known as Autumn Hill, Bradford Morris, another Trantifa activist known as Megan Morris, Zachary Everett, Savannah Betton, Marcela Rueda, Elizabeth Soto, Ines Soto, and Daniel Rolando Sanchez Estrada were indicted last year on federal charges including providing material support to terrorists, rioting, use of an explosive device, and obstruction. Jurors found the defendants guilty of providing material support to terrorists, rioting, conspiracy to use, carry explosives, and using carrying explosives. The jury acquitted the group on 2 of the charges, aiding attempted murder and aiding firearm discharge. Benjamin Song, whom prosecutors described as the ringleader, wasn't charged with the explosives-related charges, but was convicted of the more serious attempted murder of a peace officer, as well as multiple counts related to discharging a firearm during a crime of violence. Daniel Rolando Sanchez Estrada, a Mexican national, was found guilty of conspiracy to conceal documents and corruptly concealing documents or records after the attack. His partner, Marcela Rueda, was also found guilty of conspiracy to conceal documents after telling him to hide her far-left extremist texts. The defendants, described as prosecutors as members of a North Texas Antifa cell, were accused of carrying out an ambush-style shooting attack on a Prairieland ICE detention facility in Alvarado, Texas on July 4th, 2025. As the verdict was being read out, some of the Antifa supporters started wailing and crying, resulting in 2 of them being ejected from the courtroom. Defendants Zachary Everett and Bradford Morris broke down in tears. Ringleader Benjamin Song continued smirking. Today's verdict on terrorism charges will not be the last, as the Trump administration systematically dismantles Antifa and finally halts her violence on America's streets, said Attorney General Pamela Bondi. Today's verdict shows the FBI remains committed to identifying, locating, and dismantling Antifa and its funding networks across the country, said FBI Director Kash Patel. Now, you may not have heard much about this, but this is a pretty big deal. Needless to say, the mainstream media and the so-called alternative media are both showing some, shall we say, mixed feelings about all this. Local news, CBS down in Texas.
So we got some breaking news. We have a verdict in the local trial that's been gaining national attention, an alleged attack on an Alvarado ICE facility. Welcome in at 5 o'clock, everyone. That is where we begin tonight at 5. Dozens of verdicts coming down this afternoon for 9 people charged after a shooting outside the Prairieland Immigration Detention Center last summer. Federal court just wrapping up. No cameras allowed, but our Andrea Lucia was there. She's joining us live now with the moments. Andrea.
Yeah, Ken, the Department of Justice just released a statement. And to give you some context, normally a statement like this celebrating the outcome of a trial would come from the DOJ's local office. In this case, it comes from the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. She wrote, today's verdict on terrorism charges will not be the last as the Trump administration systematically dismantles Antifa and finally halts their violence on America's streets. She refers to it as an organization that has been allowed to flourish in what she calls Democrat-led cities. Out here, though, people in support of those on trial, you can see them. They have been protesting really every day of the trial here, say this is far worse. The verdicts were far worse than what they were expecting. Their fear, they say, is that anyone who protests the government could now be labeled Antifa and a terrorist. 8 people in all were convicted of this terrorism charge, specifically a charge of providing material support to terrorists. The terrorist in this case being Antifa, which some witnesses described as not being any kind of official organization, but really a blanket term for groups on the left that oppose what they feel is government overreach. This was the first time the DOJ has brought a case of domestic terrorism involving Antifa.
Now, notice the phrasing there. I mean, again, you have to look through the sort of language they use there. It's still an alleged attack. Cop got shot, by the way. The conviction's done. We don't have to say this anymore. Nope, it's alleged. Maybe it didn't even happen. And of course, Antifa isn't even a group. Whoa. The Intercept, of course, very angry about all this. And I know people always cite the Intercept. Oh, they're beyond left and right. No, they're not. The Intercept. Anti-ICE protesters convicted on terrorism charges for wearing all black. Now, I think they were convicted for a bit more than just wearing all black, but okay, they continue. A federal jury handed prosecutors a mixed victory in the trial of 9 protesters for their roles during or after a chaotic demonstration outside a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility last July, convicting 8 defendants of terrorism charges but sparing some of them on attempted murder counts. The widely watched trial could serve as a bellwether as President Donald Trump's administration seeks to crack down on left-wing groups, and the convictions could encourage prosecutors to bring more such charges. Here's hoping. A top FBI official said in December that the agency is now treating Antifa as a major domestic terror threat. Now, you may notice that they've got Antifa there in scare quotes. What are they trying to communicate? It's not a real thing. It's not an organization. It never existed. I know we talk about how great it is all the time, but it's not real. You're imagining that. The article continues a little later. In a significant victory for the government, jurors convicted 8 defendants on material support for terrorism charges for wearing black clothes to the late-night demonstration. That use of black bloc clothing was an Antifa tactic that assisted in the shooting of the officer, prosecutors said during their closing arguments. Now, was it simply that they wore black clothes? I mean, the black bloc thing is a real thing. I mean, this is us here. We've all gone to demonstrations. We've all dealt with Antifa. We all know how they operate with the black bloc. We all know that this is cover so they can get violence and have plausible deniability. Maybe some of us have experienced this like directly. We all know how this works. But they're not getting convicted just for wearing black clothes. Could it be also that the government had signal messages showing what they were discussing? Or that other guys had already flipped and were testifying about what the group was up to? But again, we always see this from the media. Nope. It was about black clothes. It was about impolite fashion. It was because they were so independent. It was because they were edgy. It was because they were punk and the government is scared because they're the man. We're so tough. We're going to kill you. No platform. Death to ICE. Death to the fascists. Wait, what do you mean you're arresting us? We're just small beings. We're peaceful protesters. We wouldn't do anything violent. We just have too much empathy. All this propaganda we put out calling for violence, that doesn't mean anything. You can't hold us accountable for that. That's free speech. In fact, there's no we at all. I don't even know these guys. I don't even know who these people are. I mean, how could I? They're wearing black clothes to conceal their identity. Truth out. Similar coverage. Jury convicts 8 in Texas case tied to Trump's war against Antifa. Again, notice the scare quotes. It's not a thing. Doesn't exist. Experts warn the verdict could set a precedent for prosecuting protest activity as terrorism. The government has largely won its first case bringing material support for terrorism charges against protesters alleged to belong to Antifa, scare quotes again, which President Donald Trump designated as a domestic terror group in 2025, despite the fact that no such organized group exists, and the president has no legal authority to designate organizations as domestic terror groups. A federal jury in Fort Worth, Texas, agreed on Friday to convict 8 people of domestic terrorism because they wore all black to a protest outside Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Prairie Land Detention Facility in Alvarado, Texas on July 4, 2025, at which one of the protesters shot and wounded a police officer. Well, no big deal, right? Legal experts say the verdict could bolster attempts by the administration to stifle dissent. A case like this helps the government kind of see how far they can go in criminalizing constitutionally protected protests, and also helps them intimidate, increase the fear, hoping that folks in other cities will think twice over protesting. Suzanne Aidley, interim president of the National Lawyers Guild, told the Associated Press. Now remember in that headline, oh, it's the experts. Experts say. Well, who's the expert? Oh, the president of the National Lawyers Guild. Well, the National Lawyers Guild is basically a communist front group. It's been for decades. A congressional committee called it all the way back in 1950 as the foremost legal bulwark of the Communist Party, its front organizations, and controlled unions. And when you see these lawyers who are at these protests, usually they have green hats or something like that, what they are trying to do is make sure that the protesters who are assaulting you or assaulting the police or destroying property or blocking your car, their job is to make sure these people get away with it. Or might even get a settlement from the taxpayers. Like, that's the National Lawyers Guild. This is not some objective observer talking about constitutional law. They're in on it. There's your expert. Why did this happen? Why are they freaking out? Say what you will about the White House, but the Trump administration made this happen. This is something they did. As Truth Out itself conceded. At first, quote, at first, the federal government charged those arrested after the event with attempted murder of a police officer, according to Nadas. However, that changed after the Trump administration's designation of Antifa as a terror group in September and the release of National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, which directs federal law enforcement to target left-leaning groups and activities. The next month, the government's case expanded to include terrorism charges. This wouldn't be a terrorism case if it weren't for that memo, one defense lawyer told Nadas on Background. By the way, Nadas is just another media outlet. Okay, so these are left-wing media outlets complaining about this. But tells you something when they're condemning the Trump administration, saying Trump is responsible for this. Well, good for Trump. But the Washington Post plays the same game. I mean, look at this headline. Texas jury convicts protesters charged with plotting Antifa attack. Now, break down just that headline, because again, most people are just going to look at the headline. Consider the framing. When someone is convicted, we can then say they did whatever they're accused of. Like if some guy gets arrested for murder, you say the alleged murderer. If he gets convicted, you just call him the murderer. That's the point. That's why we do this. If you have an Antifa group convicted of plotting an attack, the headline should be Antifa convicted of plotting attack. That's what happened. Instead, no. Texas jury convicts. They probably didn't do it. It was just a Texas jury that convicts. Why did they convict? I don't know. They're probably just racist. They're rednecks. You know how they are down there. After all, these were just protesters. They were just charged with plotting an attack. No, they did it. They were convicted. We can say that now. That's how it works. We don't have to say alleged or maybe or whatever. But if you're a reporter, you know what side you're on. And just some excerpts from this real quick to indicate how they frame it. Quote, the landmark verdict was seen as a win in the Trump administration's efforts to crack down on left-wing protesters that it is branded as an organized network of domestic terrorists, unquote. Another quick quote, attorney Lisa Pamplin, who represented Ruida, was surprised the jury believed prosecutors' Antifa argument. That's exactly what Trump wanted, she said. It's a gut punch for America, for people out here protesting. They want to send a message. The attorneys quoted Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, saying that American democracy was on trial. They said the defendants' chat messages displayed at trial showed they had planned a peaceful demonstration, not a violent attack. And then another quote, in America, we don't prosecute people for their political beliefs, said Batten's attorney, Chris Tolbert. The indictments followed an executive order signed by President Donald Trump that instructed federal law enforcement to take investigatory and prosecutorial action against those who financially support Antifa, and it labeled the group a domestic terrorist organization. That designation isn't part of existing U.S. law. They're asking you to put protesters in jail for being terrorists, said Blake Burns, who Representative Elizabeth Soto addressing the jury. That's not something that's happened before. You guys are literally the only people on earth who can stop that from happening, unquote. No, that is not why they were put on trial. Now, you may be asking yourself, if Antifa doesn't exist, then who are all these people who call themselves Antifa? You can find their websites. They're like, here's this group. We are Antifa. It is located in this city. Who are these people who show up to events? Who are these people who show up to speeches and conferences that people like us put on, threatening to kill everyone? Who's writing books like the Antifa Handbook and putting out guides about the kinds of tactics that you can use to shut things down and everything else? Well, good question. Come to think of it, who's sending death threats to everyone in the aftermath of this? Andy Ngo. And again, why do we have to quote Andy Ngo? Why do we have to keep going to this guy? Because no normal reporters will cover this stuff. Why? Because they're mostly in on it. He found the following reactions. So you've got this post. The only appropriate response is for the Prairie Land defendants is retaliation. Don't let the fascist state go unpunished. Somebody else posts, F the jury, to which somebody responds, kill, not F. And of course, the threat against Ngo himself. Quote, Andy Ngo is a Nazi terror propagandist who has incited multiple massacres. The fact that his identity and location is known, yet he continues to operate freely, is a condemnation of the Western left. Now, this is not going to go away. These people are still doing stuff. But then the Department of Justice says neither is the crackdown. The Department of Justice bragged about the outcome, part of a statement released by the DOJ. Quote, Antifa is a domestic terrorist organization that has been allowed to flourish in Democrat-led cities, not under President Trump, said Attorney General Pamela Bondi. Today's verdict on terrorism charges will not be the last as the Trump administration systematically dismantles Antifa and finally halts her violence on America's streets. And then a little later, This case marks a historic moment as it represents the nation's initial federal indictment targeting a coordinated group of Antifa cell members engaged in violent criminal activity, said HCI Dallas Special Agent in Charge Travis Pickard. The charges demonstrate our unwavering commitment to confronting domestic terrorism and protecting our communities from organized threats. Testimony and other evidence at trial established that the defendants were members of a North Texas Antifa cell, part of a larger militant enterprise made up of networks of individuals and small groups, primarily ascribing to an ideology that explicitly calls for the overthrow of the United States government, law enforcement authorities, and the system of law. An expert testifying in the government's case told the jury that Antifa's coordinated efforts involve obstructing federal law through organized riots, violent assaults, and armed confrontation with law enforcement officers, increasingly targeting agents and facilities related to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Immigration and Customs Enforcement in opposition to the agency's deportation actions, unquote. It is a war. It is a war that is being fought. And the front is about immigration law enforcement. That is the critical battle right now. And the thing is, Antifa are only able to get away with this if we conceal the reality of that war. Antifa only works if the media is able to play this double game. You need to simultaneously brag about, like, oh, they're so tough and strong, they're uncompromising, they're revolutionaries, but also they're harmless. They didn't do anything. They're peaceful protesters. If you actually start getting held accountable for threatening people with weapons or sending messages between each other about how this is a revolutionary action designed to overthrow the government, yeah, it's going to get shut down real quick. So what do reporters do? Because fundamentally, Antifa is a media phenomenon. What are the reporters trying to do? They're trying to muddy the waters. They're trying to confuse you. But there is more to be done here. There is a larger truth here. You remember just a few weeks ago, Don Lemon and a number of protesters went into that church in Minnesota and disrupted a worship service because they said one of the assistant pastors worked with ICE. Now, of course, all the pastors and the priests and the bishops and all these people, they will trample a small child to get to a microphone to complain about, Jesus wants immigration laws to be abolished or something like that. They had nothing to say about a church being invaded. The DOJ did something, though. Now, what happened? Don Lemon and others were charged under the KKK Act, which is amusing, but specifically for conspiracy to deprive rights and interfering by force with someone's First Amendment rights. Now, you can laugh about the KKK Act and whatever else, but that's not what's important. The important part is you can charge someone federally because they are trying to deprive you of your First Amendment rights. Well, what is Antifa? Like, what do they do? Let's break it down. What is the point of them? One of the things that the jury, this was in the Washington Post article, did before they returned the guilty verdict, in this case in Texas, is they reviewed the Anti-Fascist Handbook by Mark Bray. This is something that I've reviewed here before. This is something I wrote a book about years ago. Now, the author here, he actually fled the country after the election of Trump, and hopefully he stays there. These are a couple excerpts from that book. In regard to free speech, he defended Antifa and its no-platform style tactics. Quote, this is from his book. Instead of privileging allegedly neutral universal rights, anti-fascists prioritized the political project of destroying fascism and protecting the vulnerable, regardless of whether their actions are considered violations of the free speech of fascists or not, unquote. A little later, in fact, historically, fascist and fascistic ideas have thrived in open debate, you don't say. Sometimes public discourse hasn't been sufficient to squash fascism, but sometimes it hasn't been, which is why anti-fascists refuse to pin their hopes for the freedom and security of humanity on processes of public discourse that have already shown themselves to be fallible. Unquote. I feel like that's a pretty revealing admission, don't you? Like, if we actually have free speech, if people are allowed to debate ideas, like people are going to choose fascism. I mean, those are his words, not mine. And near the conclusion, let us not forget, quote, anytime someone takes action against transphobic, racist bigots, from calling them out, to boycotting their business, to shaming them for their oppressive beliefs, to ending a friendship unless someone shapes up, they are putting an anti-fascist outlook into practice that contributes to a broader, everyday anti-fascism that pushes back the tide against the alt-right, Trump, and his loyal supporters. Our goal should be that in 20 years, those who voted for Trump are too uncomfortable to share that fact in public. We may not always be able to change someone's beliefs, but we sure as hell can make it politically, socially, economically, and sometimes physically costly to articulate them, unquote. You know, this dweeby little professor, he sure is bold about talking about physical violence, isn't he? One wonders, like, what actual experience he has with this. But this is what anti-fascism is. This is what Antifa is. By its very nature, we can define anti-fascism as nothing more than a conspiracy to deny Americans their First Amendment rights. That's what it is. That's who they are. That's all they are. They want to take away your right to talk, to discuss, to watch what you want. This is what they are. These people are a threat to you personally. So yeah, this is a victory. I give Trump credit for this. This conviction in Texas sets a precedent. Yeah, it's not true that the DOJ is doing nothing, but they're not doing enough. This is only the beginning, because now you have this precedent. Now you have something that you could unleash on just about every single Antifa group in the country, and it needs to be. The precedent is set, the legal infrastructure is set, and here's the key. These sorts of things are going to be used on them, or it's going to be used on us. Like the way Antifa work, fundamentally, for all the revolutionary talk, is they are the militant wing of the system. No serious interests are threatened by them. We had Rob Rundo on this show not long ago. Started all these active clubs. Federal government was chasing him for years. Why? The FBI was literally using Antifa websites as primary sources in their court documents. The aforementioned Mark Bray, capitalism, and I'm a revolutionary. He's on Meet the Press. That book was championed by Keith Ellison, Attorney General of Minnesota, who probably would have been Attorney General, or at least a high-ranking member of the DOJ if Kamala Harris had won. And maybe if they win next time, he will be. Like, this is going to be us or them. I wish it didn't work that way, but it does. Like, it's not Erica Kirk after you. It's these people. And free speech is still under attack. Now, remember, Identity Politics, this show, is fundamentally a production of American Renaissance. Jared Taylor is my boss. I work for him. Mr. Taylor was just invited to speak at Salisbury University in Maryland, and naturally, the campus has gone nuts. The Baltimore Sun reports, white nationalist Jared Taylor says postponed Salisbury talk will still happen despite backlash. A Jared Taylor speaking engagement that had been scheduled for March 9th at Salisbury University has not been rescheduled after the school postponed the event last week, citing safety concerns, after hundreds raised objections on social media. Salisbury University, the Maryland GOP, and civil rights leaders all condemned Taylor as an extremist, while the event organizers said hosting the speaker was a matter of free speech. Taylor had a simple message for those who said they felt threatened by his views. Grow up. They should never feel threatened by ideas, Taylor told the Baltimore Sun. These are not 3-year-olds who have just been told there is no tooth fairy, or maybe they are. Organized by the Maryland Federation of College Republicans, the event had been titled, Can the American Race Problem Be Solved? A flyer advertising the event described Taylor as the godfather of the alt-right and promoted his 2011 book, White Identity, unquote. I still don't think you can even get White Identity on Amazon. There's your free speech. How quickly it goes to questions of safety. This is Jared Taylor talking. Safety. Safety from whom? Who poses the threat? Who's threatening violence here? So Colin McEvers, who's the student who invited Mr. Taylor, made the following video.
This is the guy who everyone is so concerned about, who everyone is calling a reprehensible, disgusting human being. This is the person that has caused all of the drama and controversy at Salisbury University and in the state. Watch.
You can be black, Hispanic, Asian, Indian, African, anything at all. You can be proud of who you are, not white people. You're everything we hope for. Lefties' heads are spinning because they know we're winning. So this is back when I was still respectable, writing about Japan.
And this is what he had to say in regards to all of these groups, all of these individuals, designating him as a hater, as a hate monger, as all these titles and labels that people use to suppress speech. Watch.
So they consider you a hate monger?
Yes, I'm a hater. They can look into my soul. They know what motivates me. Don't even talk to him because we know. And they say, because we know, we have designated him a hate group. And so every time the liberal media talks to someone like me, they say, and by the way, this objective rating agency, as if they're sort of a Standard and Poor of the ideological spectrum, they have put him on the hate list. No, this is just absurd.
Now, as Mr. Taylor said, he's not necessarily happy about being described as a harmless old man, but these days you take what you can get. The more serious point is that so many of us, especially online, we're so used to being in our little far-right bubble that we think things out there are better than they actually are. I mean, let's face it, Jared Taylor's basically a liberal in the movement now. He's like the left wing of the acceptable discourse in our little subculture, and yet you still can't have him speak at a college campus. You still can't have a white advocacy event without opposition. And to go back to where we began with all this, the same people who will disrupt the event, the same people who won't allow it to take place, the same people who may be making threats, what are they going to say? They're going to use the excuses of safety. They're the ones who are victims. This talk endangers them. They're going to frame these kinds of disruptions as defensive actions. Obviously, we have to just keep plugging away, and it requires brave students on campus who are willing to host events, and it requires support for American Renaissance from readers and viewers like you, but that's not enough. It also means a government that is willing to defend freedom of speech for ideas that shouldn't even be controversial. Like, let's not get off on the idea of just being edgy for edgy's sake. It is not far right, or it should not be far right, to be pro-white. It should be common sense. It should be the default condition. And people should be able to express that idea without threat of attack, regardless of what communists think about it. The DOJ's conviction of Antifa is a big deal. It's a very big precedent. Since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, it represents the biggest victory we've seen on the home front in the war against these people. But it's only the beginning. We have a long way to go before we can enjoy the kinds of rights that every single one of our ancestors took utterly for granted. Hey guys, quick reminder before we continue. You can follow Identity Politics on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, and TikTok. And if you want to make sure you never miss an episode, sign up for our email list. If you believe in this work and you want to help us stay fully independent, you can support us directly on Ko-Fi. We offer bronze, silver, gold, and white membership tiers, or you can give a one-time contribution, whatever works for you. Every bit of support helps fund production, research, and our ability to speak freely without corporate or platform pressure. All the links are in the description below. Now back to the show. What is needed more than anything else, what this show is fundamentally about, is a collective white racial consciousness that becomes a political force. That's it. That's what we need in a sense. What am I after? That's what I'm after. Well, we may have a step forward with the creation of the White Civil Advocacy Project, a new organization. The White Civil Advocacy Project is committed to ensuring that white Americans are fairly treated and appropriately represented in all arenas of American public and private life. So it's from their website. It says its mission is to make white advocacy socially acceptable, politically relevant, and free from economic repercussions. We will lay the groundwork and pave the way for a new generation of professional and effective white advocacy in the United States. Look, I'm not a part of the organization. Well, it just started yesterday, so how could I be? But I can't disagree with any of this. Now, it's slightly different tactics. It's a 501c4 organization. New Century Foundation is a 501c3 educational foundation, so they're going to be more explicitly political. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And the executive director should be a familiar face to a lot of you. CJ Engel is the co-host of the Contra Mundum podcast. He has a right enemies, with reporters writing hit pieces on Christian nationalism and how it's going to kill us all. You can also find him as Contra Mundor on X. One of the rising stars of the movement. Someone who is really putting himself out there, and he's going to be the executive director of this new organization. Deserves a lot of credit for that. He joins us now. Check it out. Well, CJ, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, I got to say, I'm pretty impressed that you're taking on the mantle executive director of this new organization, because it seems like you're everywhere. You're already involved in like 4 separate media projects, but I can't really think of anybody else who's more suited to take it up. So first off, congratulations.
Thanks, man. It's going to be a lot of work, but a lot of fun. It's time to push the Overton window. We've been pushing it for years, but now it's time to enter into Normieville. I think that's what I'm going to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've been pushing for a long time, because as somebody who's been on the far right for a long time, you find yourself, especially now, the ideas that we're talking about should not be considered radical. In fact, they're common sense. And from the standpoint of what we're advocating for white people compared to what other groups advocate for their own people, I mean, we're practically liberals, and yet we get treated like we're completely out of bounds.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, like one of the things that I've come to appreciate is the fact that anytime someone accuses you of doing some novel, extreme radical thing, you just point back to history and say, literally, I'm to the left of all of these people. Like our entire heritage is built on all of this stuff that you call fascism, and yet that built our world. And so we're not creating anything new. We're literally just echoing what our forefathers have said for centuries, basically.
Right, right. I do want to get into this a little bit before we talk about some of the other projects you've been involved with, but really quickly, the objective of this organization, obviously, is to normalize white advocacy. And this is something that has been tried before. Obviously, if you think like a few decades back, arguably you could say my boss, Jared Taylor, has been trying to do the same thing for a long time. What makes you think it has a better chance of success now compared to where we were, say, 10 or 20 years ago?
I think a lot of people realize that, like they think of civil rights, they think of non-discrimination, and they think of all of the narratives about not having prejudice or being biased, and people have grown up with that rhetoric, and they just think, okay, that means everyone has to be nice to everybody, and that's great. It's the colorblind vision. But what people are starting to realize is that it was actually never a colorblind vision. It was actually always an anti-white vision. It was always a mechanism. It tricked people. It got them to think that we were building some utopia, but actually what we were doing was dispossessing heritage Americans, white Americans, ethnic Americans, the people that inherited a wonderful nation, the people that were the descendants of the settlers and pioneers and conquerors that came through and created America for the first time, were the Native Americans. And I think people are recognizing the fact that this whole project of civil rights has actually been a mechanism of the Great Replacement. And so now people are ticked off. They're like, look, we need our country back. And we can't do that while maintaining the colorblind orthodoxy of the last half century.
Right. I mean, what you especially see now is, especially with these non-white groups and everything else, they seem to have completely jettisoned the idea of colorblindness. I mean, even 10 years ago, you could say that the very definition of not being racist is to be colorblind. Now, to be colorblind is to be racist. You go to any university, this is what you are going to be taught. And so at a certain point, it's going to be just white people throwing aside these illusions. All that said, I think we're both kind of a certain generation and everything else. It does seem that a lot of older Americans are still wedded to this kind of colorblind vision, and they just will not give up the ship, so to speak. I mean, I find that the most fanatical defenders of Martin Luther King tend to be old white conservatives.
Yeah, and so this project isn't, for them. It's not to mobilize them. It's really to mobilize the youth. I mean, the right-wing youth are the people that need to kind of take action. They need leaders. They need people that kind of blaze a trail and make things normalized for them. And see, that's what a lot of this project is. 10 years ago, the idea of a white advocacy group would have been considered like straight up Hitlerian. And now it's like, you have congressmen who are not perfect by any means, but they're using the rhetoric that 10 years ago would have got you, fired. And rhetoric like deportations, remigration, reversing legal immigration. So, we won the battle on illegal immigration. We won the battle on stopping legal immigration. And now we're winning the battle on reversing legal migration. And so we're making these steps each year. We're making progress. And you literally have congressmen calling for mass deportations. And another phrase that's becoming normalized is denaturalization.
Right.
We have this obligation not just to stop things in 2026 from getting worse, but to actually go back and try to restore the America that was abandoned by the conservatives of a half century ago. And so it was funny. One of the things I posted on Twitter was that I did some work on Grok, and I said, give me 5 organizations that represent the interests of Indians, Hindus, Muslims, Latinos, Jews, Blacks. I listed 12 of them.
Right.
And whites. Whites was at the bottom. And they literally give me 5 to 7 organizations for each one. They were all filled out. And then in the whites, this is hilarious. In the white section, it said, we cannot find any that match your description. However, for something close, please check out the SPLC.
They're just about helping Southern poverty. I mean, that's all it is.
So it's like, now is the time, and there needs to be one line item in that Grok answer in the next year, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah. I 100% agree. Now, as a 501c4, you have a bit more political freedom than, say, I do with the New Century Foundation. I mean, we're an educational foundation, so we can't take political stances as such. But as a C4, I think you can do a bit more in terms of supporting candidates, at least to some extent, popularizing certain issues. Do you see your home naturally as on the right with the Republican Party? Or are you looking to just support whoever comes up? Or do you think that we're at a point where people, and I'm going to start by saying I don't think this is possible, but you may disagree. Do you think we're at a point where something like a third party movement is necessary or even possible?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I go back and forth on that. Like, I've long been, an opponent, despiser of the GOP. I mean, the GOP has never been something that's interested me. There's always a few candidates, here and there that will get, access to the GOP once in a while. So I'm not opposed to using them for strategic means. I mean, even when we thought Trump was going to be better, I don't even mind voting for someone like that who's going to take the reins. I mean, the GOP is there. If it can be used, then we should use it. But I think what we're seeing right now is it's becoming increasingly obvious that that might be a dead end. Now, third party, there's been a lot of third parties that have tried to start up. It takes a ton of financial resources, takes a lot of political capital, and they do not last very long. I mean, it's really hard to start a third party in our system. So I don't think we'll be spending a lot of time on that. We're kind of in this in-between time where the GOP obviously they're hunkering down. They're like, there's an entire base of people, of once Trump supporters that are far to his right. They're coming of age. They're in their 30s and their 40s, and they want to radicalize the GOP. And the GOP establishment right now is going to great lengths to make sure that never happens again. They can never get so close to having the reins pulled away from them that they are going to make it increasingly difficult for right-wingers to infiltrate the GOP and use it for our objectives. And so I think that the GOP is going to be harder in the next few cycles to get hold of. I'm not very optimistic about it, but we're not quite ready for a third party yet. We don't quite have the momentum, but maybe within a decade, I could see that happening.
Well, it should be noted that all the congressmen that you're talking about, specifically those who are saying Muslims do not belong in American society, that we need to talk about denaturalization, all these sorts of things, these are actually sitting Republican congressmen. I mean, this is a big deal, especially when you consider what Steve King, who spoke in American Renaissance a couple of years ago, but that was after he was ousted from Congress. All of Congress, including himself, incidentally, voted to condemn him for a misquoted interview where they said, he said white civilization is Western civilization, which he actually didn't say. But they all fell for it, and they all, hit their knees and everything else. Whereas now, I mean, they're saying things well to the right of what Steve King used to say. So there has been, is it fair to say that there's been some progress, at least on the immigration issue?
There's been some progress. And it's important for people to remember, too, that it's not just them. I mean, they are on Twitter. They're reading this stuff. I mean, there are people who, they look at the website. Some of them might even be looking at VDare, places like that. But it's also important to remember that a lot of the information, a lot of the rhetoric, and I know this for certain, I can't say that certain people, but a lot of the rhetoric that's getting into their mouths is actually coming from their staffers. Right. People don't appreciate the fact that you get young staffers and they follow you online and they read the content. They're the ones that are giving the congressman a body of rhetoric that they can use for our ends. That's actually where the power is coming from. And these staffers are going to mature. They're going to grow up into places of power. And eventually they're going to the war is going to get hot. The left is going to be even more left-wing, even more radicalized to the left, even more anti-white. And so part of our objective is to be a mirror of that. The more anti-white they get, the more that we have to fight for the defense and the well-being of our own people.
Right. Now, talk a little bit about some of the other projects you're involved with, because obviously you've got this Christian podcast. And what's interesting, I find, is you're coming at it from a Protestant perspective. And you're coming at it from a perspective that, frankly, in the conservative movement now, or the online right, whatever you want to call it, it's just something you don't hear very often. I mean, they're often attacked pretty brutally, of course. But I mean, historically, this has been a Protestant country. I mean, that's what it was founded as. And there's not really a future for the American right or America in general, unless there's some sort of a place for Protestants, especially considering that is the right-wing base in the South. Do you find it difficult operating in the environment that we're in now with all the religious infighting, especially when so many, let's be blunt, of the Protestant denominations in this country have been entirely subverted. I mean, mainline Protestantism has basically been completely destroyed.
Yes. So, I mean, the evangelical scene is in a state of turmoil. I mean, you can talk, we all know that like the Episcopal Church and the Methodists and all of them, they've gone off the deep end a long time ago. But you take a typical like Southern Baptist Convention or some sort of Presbyterian church, largely speaking, if you are a pastor or an elder or you're something and you're into not even like identity politics, but you're reading like Pat Buchanan or something, and you're reading some paleo-conservative, Richard Weaver, like that you will get in trouble. So it's the state of evangelicalism has been entirely subverted. And it's not just the left, the left flank, it's the conservatives actually that are giving us the most trouble. So I would say the state of evangelical church in America has very much been subverted by the left or depoliticalized, where like if you think in terms of politics, you're a bad person. And you just think back, like, you may not be a Christian, but you just think back in the history of England and the history of Germany and France. And for thousands of years, nobody questioned the fact that to be a Christian was completely consistent with fighting for your identity, for your people, for your family.
Right.
And it's bizarre the fact that we're never allowed to speak in those terms when literally that is the most normal thing. That's part of our own history. It's part of our own heritage. And so we're seeking to bring that back. And so I wouldn't say, so yes, there is a base. I mean, my friend Stephen Wolfe calls it the lone bulwark. I mean, that is like the base of conservatism in America, but it is not healthy and it needs to be pushed. It needs to be challenged. It needs to grow. And there are a lot of young men that are doing that. So I do have a podcast. It's not huge. But I do think my Christian identity is important to the things that I do. It drives me. And I do think that there is a Protestant ethos worth salvaging in America.
Do you find it difficult to simultaneously champion this sort of Christian nationalism or Christian identity with white racial identity? Because historically, obviously, there's been no problem. For most of the time, actually, it's basically been the same thing, at least in the history of this country. But now it is precisely the religious leaders who will tell you, well, that's not allowed.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, you're not met with open arms when you start talking like that. But from my perspective, it's an extension of our obligations to our family, because that's part of what an ethnicity is. It's an extended family. And so people are very good about talking about obeying your parents and honoring your parents and even your grandparents. You should honor them. You should take care of your siblings should have priority in your life over some random stranger. They're really good on that nuclear family stuff. But when you extend it out to the tribe or to the nation or to the race, they do not like that. And for me, it's just a further step. It's just another argument. Like I would take care of my immediate wife and children before I would take care of, America in a broad sense, because they're closer to me. But I do want to take care of America in a broad sense more than I want to take care of Iran or Israel or China or anything like that. And to me, it's just this logical step. It's not controversial. It's the very thing that I was raised to believe. I take care of my brother before my friend, just extended into a broader concentric circle. And so for me, it's not confusing at all. And I think a lot of people get scared because they grew up in a milieu of fear about speaking in terms of your people. There's this latent universalism that actually borrows from Christian language, and you know this. It borrows from Christian language, and then it subverts the nation. It says that because Christ died for the world, therefore you can't have priority scales. That doesn't follow at all, but that's the thing that's been beaten to evangelicals' head over and over again, and it makes it increasingly difficult. I will say, though, that for younger people, the scales have fallen off their eyes, and they do not believe the post-war consensus worldview at all. So things are good for us. We're just, us millennials are a bridge between the boomers that are going to die off and the Zoomers and the Generation Alpha that are coming up behind us. And so we take that role as a bridge very seriously.
Yeah, speaking as a millennial, I've become increasingly conscious of that. That is basically our historic role is to try to be that bridge. One of the things that I've found, which is very interesting, is you see the same sort of debate happening among Catholics, and this is obviously a tradition I have more experience with, that J.D. Vance, of course, brought up the idea of the Ordo Amoris or whatever it is, essentially the same doctrine that you were talking about. And then the Pope, of all people, basically fired back and basically said, like, no, we don't do that anymore. And certainly when you look at well, they don't do a lot of things after Vatican II, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the Southern Baptists, it seems that ever since the rise of Trump in 2015, there's been a concerted effort within that organization to basically say, no, we are not going to be affiliated, not just with Trump, but with conservatives as a whole. We are going to basically depoliticize. But this is coupled with this insane celebration of every other ethnic group. I mean, you see explicit declarations of solidarity with Black Lives Matter, with all these different groups, rejecting their own heritage, rejecting their own theology, saying we have to appeal to this group and that group. But at the end of the day, it's still mostly Southern white guys who are holding up this entire denomination. And within the Catholic Church, it's the same thing. It's the younger guys who are coming in who are basically radicalized pre-Vatican II a lot of times. And it's like their leaders who are saying, well, listen, we're actually not even all that happy that you're here. And so my question to you is, and I know this may be a little outside the wheelhouse because it's like ecclesiastical politics, but how does one save an institution where the leadership itself is the problem? Because really, that's not just talking about the church, it's talking about like America.
Yeah. This is a classic paradox. It's one of those things where like, it's on a case-by-case basis. I mean, some things need to be burned to the ground. I don't think you can say that about the Catholic Church I have Anglican instincts, and it's like run by a left-wing woman bishop. And so it's like, is my commitment really to the Church of England with this lady who wants to be burned at the stake? So it's like, I think that we have to just kind of wait it out, and we have to survive in the meantime. I think that their day is dying. I don't think that there's very much appeal to it. You look at even the younger, Gen Z left, they are much more of a burning the right to the ground. So liberalism is dying. This idea that we can create a world of tolerance, this idea that we can all be individuals and learn to respect each other's preferences, that's gone. Neither the left nor the right are interested in that. It's a return to classical politics. And so I would say in terms of letting the liberal class die off, that's going to happen inevitably. What we have to be gearing up for is an existential conflict with the left. I really see in the next several decades this conflict that's going to be racially driven. It's not going to be purely race, but race is going to be a lot of it. There's still that decolonialization mindset, that the spirit of revenge that whites, because they inherited a West that was built on what they call, colonialism and, stealing land and all the stuff that they say, they actually have been radicalized completely and they want us dead. And so that's going to be a large part of it. But I think if we're going to actually recover our ethnic heritage, there's going to have to be a role for the church, the traditional church. And so I'm not really worried about the present establishment of liberals. I'm more trying to gear up my peers, my colleagues, people who are co-belligerents in preparing to fight for the left, because that's going to be a war that my children are going to have to face. That's kind of where my heart is, 10 to 20 years down the road. I think the next 10 years are going to be rough for us. I mean, we're going to be pushed to the margins for sure, but we can survive that. We've been through worse. The bigger war is going to come after that. We have to make sure that we somehow carve out some resources for ourselves so that we can prepare for something that's even bigger.
What do you think the danger is in terms of the so-called Christian left? Now, I think you and I would agree that they're not actually Christian, but if you look at somebody like James Tellerico, the Senate candidate down in Texas, if you look at, frankly, the way most of the churches operate now, and you could argue this is driven by religion or not, but Catholic Charities, all these Protestants, the Lutherans bringing in all these refugees, which has totally transformed Minnesota within just like a decade. I mean, when you look at institutional power, if you were looking at what exactly do Christian institutions do? Where is the money being spent? How are they actually using this power? The unfortunate truth is, I would say the vast majority of it is used to bring non-whites to America for profit. I mean, they are getting paid for this. It's not even being done out of charity. So when people talk about, well, we need to put Christianity back at the center of American life, somebody like Tallarico would be like, yes, and the way we do that is by welcoming the stranger and funding refugee resettlement more and all this kind of stuff. How do you respond to this sort of thing? Because it's not just a war about whether Christianity will be restored to the center of American life. It's a war over who gets to claim the mantle of Christianity, because somebody like that would say, well, you're not Christian enough.
Correct. Yeah, this is very important. I think I might even emphasize this more than a lot of my friends, that the entire like superstructure of narratives and like the rhetorical body that kind of runs the American regime is actually built on Christian themes. It's built on things like love. It's built on things like tolerance, even though tolerance isn't really a Christian virtue, but it's built on kindness. It's built on forgiveness. It's built on all of these things that we learned in Sunday school. That's how the left is built. You can't pretend like it's the left against your Christian rhetoric. It's actually the left who's exploited, or Orrin McIntyre says, wears it as a skin suit. I think that that's very important. I think that a lot of even like Christian nationalists or right-wing Christians, they underappreciate the extent to which Christianity has been employed for the sake of this constant anti-white revolution. We have to digest that more. So what I would say is that you cannot decouple Christianity from heritage. The second you do that, you get this left-wing heritage. And so the problem with the American left is that it's Christianity in the service of Jacobinism. But what we need is to recouple or refuse heritage, cultural inheritance, even an ethnos, an identity with our Christian past, and fuse those together, because Christianity can't exist by itself. It's not an abstraction. It has to be grounded in something. It has to be built into our very being. And so that means you have to bring in components like the state, our history, our family, us as a people, our collective memory, our collective experiences, all the things that we consider our heroes and legends, the fathers on whose shoulders that we stand. That's the Christianity that has to be built up. It can't be a disembodied Christianity, because a disembodied Christianity is what we have. That is what the left right now is, a disembodied Christianity. And so what we need to do is push back against that and say, no, we cannot decouple them anymore. We have to fuse them together. And that's kind of my project.
I mean, I suppose, not to get ahead of ourselves, but if one were to speak of a meaningful Christian nationalism, so to speak, this battle would have to be won first, because you could imagine somebody like a Tallarico being like, oh yeah, I support Christian nationalism, and Christian nationalism means unlimited immigration and money for all these sorts of things. So like, which has always been my kind of objection to the idea of Christian nationalism as a concept. It's not that I think it's a bad idea as such, or I'm offended by it or something like that. It's that who gets to claim it, because it could just so easily be claimed by people who are against us in every single way. Because all you'd have to do is just say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, and as a Christian, I support all these left-wing things.
Yeah. So one of the things that people misunderstand about it, and there's various versions of it. I've actually never called myself one, but I am friends with all those guys. But I will say that one of the misunderstandings of it is people kind of see it as like a Christian version of propositional nationhood, where like, okay, we're gonna abandon the civil rights propositions, but you have to agree with all these Christian propositions, and then you're part of the nation. That's not. In fact, that's actually one of the biggest misunderstandings of it. And it was one of the early reasons I didn't really adopt it for myself. But really, the emphasis is on the fact that it's a nationalism. It is a people that are gathering together. And part of our heritage is Christianity. And so therefore, we should have the political freedom to push back on institutions that are at odds with that, including Muslim ones, including Hinduism. We could even talk about, like the Jewish religious presence, and whether, how that relates to our Christian ethos. But the point is that it is a nationalism, and part of being a people means that we have a shared metaphysic. We have a shared way of understanding the purpose of history, a teleology, a purpose of humanity, and an ethic. Social graces, social norms, even things like the family as an institution. All of these things are downstream of our Christian cultural heritage. And so our type of nationalism is self-consciously Western. And to be self-consciously Western means to embrace Christianity. And if you're historically rooted in your Christianity, you're by nature going to reject the left-wing disembodied Christianity of the current left. And so people can say, well, what if I want my way of Christianity, to win out? It's the answer to that is politics matters, and whoever's in charge gets to choose. And that's why you can't have a depoliticized mindset. Like evangelicals have a very depoliticized mindset. They think in terms of, we're going to privatize our faith, we're going to keep it over here, we're going to let whatever happens in public life happen. But actually, we think the state matters. And we even think, you mentioned all the charities, the Christian NGOs, and all these things that are basically actively subverting and looting the American people. Well, the state has a role in stopping that. And I do believe that they don't have some absolute right to private property in the sense that they get to loot the American people and use it to subvert and replace them. And so I do think that there is a role for the state in seizing NGO assets. If these massive Catholic charities are going to bring in people from overseas, they need to have their bank accounts seized, and then they need to be stopped. And you can't appeal to some religious principle that transcends the interests of the state. And so that's part of our body of rhetoric and strategy as well.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and I'm really glad that you brought it up, because that's been one of the most common objections, the idea that Christian nationalism is just another variation of the proposition nation. I think you've rebutted that very effectively. And it's interesting, too, when you think of Western history or even church history, how often religious leaders would talk of a particular people as a holy people, as a covenant people, but they would talk about them as a people. And you can think of this obviously from Catholic examples, like the way the popes used to talk about the Franks, or if you want to look at the Protestant example, the way the Afrikaners thought of themselves as almost a covenant people with the Day of the Vow at the Battle of Blood River and things like that. It seems like only in the last 40 years has there been this radical thing where, oh, if you're a Christian, you're not actually part of a nation at all. If that's actually true, then basically there were no Christians until 1965, which seems to be what you're required to believe now.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You will be held in contempt. You will be defrocked. You will be kicked out of your church. I know many young men whose memberships have been rescinded because they followed the wrong blog or they listened to the wrong podcast. Right. And and it's like, my friend Andrew, he's a pastor, and he's like, well, we always talk about the fact that anybody should be reached, all are welcome, people can come in, and yet if you do not have sufficiently left-wing or liberalized political views, you are not worthy. And it's like everything's a fake, right? They use this Christian rhetoric, but they don't really mean it. And you can tell by the fact that these young and that's another thing. They get mad about these young right-wing men who are being radicalized. It's like, look, you don't even let them in your church. What else are they going to do? They're going to become radicalized. And I want to do my very best, whatever I can do, to harness that frustration and anger and put it to productive ends. And so much of what I'm doing in Tennessee with the Civil Advocacy Project, with these other things, is I want to harness that, and I want them to learn how to live a life and build for the future in spite of an institutional hatred that's directed against them.
About a decade ago, or maybe 15 years ago, when I started getting involved in this, there was this whole idea of kinism that was particularly popular among Southern Christians I knew. And there was a lot of pushback and fighting within the church and everything about that. The term itself seems to have fallen out of use, but is it fair to say that kinism is essentially the sort of doctrine that you're teaching?
Yeah, so kinism, there's like several types, I guess. I mean, there's one type that always speaks in terms of is it a sin? Is it if you marry this person, are you living in sin? I don't really go down that road. It doesn't really make sense to me to obsess over that. What I'm more interested in is this good for the well-being of our people? And so it's not let's say I marry an Asian woman, and I'm always going to be in this state of this sin, and I have to overcome this. I don't think that's kind of the point of it. But I do think that we have to think in terms of what is good for the continuity of our heritage? What is good for the continuity of our culture? Is it honoring to our great-great-grandfathers that set up this this nation for us. And obviously they were against it. And it's not because they had this constant self-conscious hatred of anyone who did not look like them. It was really because they saw this blend of who they were as a people with the culture that needed to be passed on from generation to generation. And so kinism, I always think of as this idea that it's somehow like inherently individualistically sinful. So because I don't frame it like that, I don't call myself that. But I do think that we need to rethink the interests of our people as a whole, the interests of the nation, the well-being of the political realm. Like, these are things that we're allowed to talk about. And if you talk in those terms, then the natural implication is that you deny universalist individualism, that you don't believe anymore that we are just a bunch of random individuals who can intermix and we can create this mosaic world of no borders and no nations and no cultures, and that the culture and the nation is worth preserving. And if it is worth preserving, then it has implications about who you marry and who you have children with.
Right. All right. Yeah, that's exactly what I've been kind of thinking for a long time, is that everyone gets lost in the weeds of sort of these theological debates of individual sin and things like that. And it's like, but there is a broader picture here. And this was something. Picture. And if you look at what they used to print sermons of basically every denomination in newspapers like a century ago. I mean, it's remarkable if you look at like an old newspaper. And most of what these guys talked about were social and political issues. And they would talk about it in terms similar to what you described. What is best for our people? What is best for our culture? What is best for our heritage? And these were like the Methodists, the Episcopalians, the people that we just kind of assume are like, oh, they have always been woke. And it's like, but they weren't. I mean, Robert E. Lee was an Episcopalian. I mean, he understood God, I think, very differently than whatever bishop does today.
Yeah,
so it's, I mean, at some point, like, they can't both be right. And I guess this is the broader question, is that somebody like me, for example, who will say, well, look, Spengler said Christianity is the godfather of Marxism. There's all these sorts of bad things that are caught up in it and everything else. It's being taken to its logical conclusion. On the other hand, one has to say they can't both be right. I mean, the female bishopess and Robert E. Lee are both members of the same denomination. But if God is real, one of them is in heaven and one of them is not. They can't both be there.
Yeah.
So how does one push back against the idea that Christianity sort of inherently gets taken to this point? It gets taken to its logical conclusion of universalism and sort of universal tolerance, where it almost doesn't seem to matter so much whether you even believe in God, as James Tellerico has basically said. And he's speaking as a pastor and whatever else. But at the same time, you are trying to defend a heritage that it seems like the leaders of these denominations, even the so-called conservatives, people like John Piper, people like that, seem to want no part of.
Yes. I would say the moment that Christianity became decoupled with the earth, the things around us, and it became this spiritualized thing, it was on its way to doom. And that's really what I would say about it. I mean, something happened in the post-Enlightenment era where Christianity became this thing that was entirely spiritualized. It had nothing to do with real life society, had no role in politics. It had nothing to say about the family, the extended family, the tribe, the nation. It had nothing to say about all that. It was deeply personal, and it became wholly immaterial. And the second religion became that. I think it was kind of set on this pathway. So I would say the correction is to bring it back down to earth and to recognize that I'm someone who believes in this, in the metaphysical significance of like the incarnation, this union of body and soul, and that's what we are. And so when we are a union of body and soul, suddenly politics matters because it deals with the real world. It deals with things like material, financial inheritance too. That you are doing things on behalf of your great-great-grandchildren whom you will never meet. You have a posterity that you have to think about and set up because you have a long-term goal in mind. And when Christianity becomes infused with the real world, it begins to lose its political idealism, and it begins to take on much more of a Christian realism in politics. And a Christian realism implies distinguishing between you and them, your family and your not family, your nation and those who are outside of your nation, those who are inside your civilization and those who aren't, the friend and the enemy. Suddenly it becomes something that's real life. And I don't think the left is, their model of Christianity basically rips apart the individual from the community, from their inheritance. And I think that's the solution. We have to recouple them. I do think that it's right to critique the Christianity that became disembodied. But the answer is that we have to find our way out in understanding better our own history and our own heritage, because we have thousands of years of examples of theologians, of Christian politicians, of kings, of monarchs, of soldiers, of warriors, of writers who would speak about this, that the building up of civilization is a Christian enterprise. And once you speak in those terms, you can't be a leftist.
Fair to say then that you would deny the idea that Christianity is inherently a world-denying faith, and that it's, I mean, that's a good way to think about it in terms of the incarnation and everything else, that once God is present in the real sense in the physical earthly realm, how can you hold the way so many of these evangelical leaders do, that we lose down here? And that there's this sort of like nihilism to the way you approach everyday life, where it doesn't matter what you do because you just like go to heaven. I mean, if that's true, then why do anything?
Yeah. The whole heaven model is actually something that's new and innovative. And it's part of that spiritualization of Christianity. Whereas before, and the model that a lot of us adopt, is that the point of Christianity is not to get to heaven. The point of Christianity is to expand the knowledge of Christ on earth, and that's to build the kingdom on earth. And God's kingdom is built through civil kingdoms. It's built by converting the king. It's built by having a Christian politics. And at the end of time, the point is not to all go to heaven, but the end of time is to have this world that reflects the heavenly order. And once you bring it back down to earth, politics really does matter. And you can speak in terms of spiritual dimension and cosmic conflict and things like that. And you can't rely on this escapism that I think just overwhelms the boomer mind. This escapism that says all you have to do is retire, spend what you have, you're going to heaven, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But seriously, like people don't realize that the left wing mentality of disembodied Christianity actually works really well with GOP boomerism. It's real, like people don't realize that.
Right.
But if nothing on earth matters, spend every dime you have, because your kids will figure it out for themselves, and then they'll go to heaven. There's nothing worth building here.
Right. I'm really glad you said that, because that seems to be a very apt breakdown of the metaphysics underlying this sort of thing. And I've been astonished at how, because when I came into politics, I mean, again, kind of old here, it was basically George W. Bush. And the Christian right was basically triumphant. I mean, raised Catholic, so it's not like I knew a lot of evangelicals, but when you're working on campaigns and stuff, the rank and file, the guys who are like licking the envelopes and stamping them and knocking on doors and stuff, they're all evangelical Christians. They're all homeschooled. Like these are the soldiers of the right. And it's almost like because somebody saw the political potential of this kind of a movement, it's like the people who were running it decided we can never let this happen again. We actually have to like sabotage our own side. We actually want to lose. And I don't know precisely what explains that. I mean, you could argue it's a heretical reading of Christianity. Maybe they just wanted to get a byline on the New York Times like David French. I mean, it could be as simple as that. Yeah. But there does seem to be this kind of fetish, not just among certain Christian leaders, but really among white people generally, where it's almost like they want to lose. They want to lose because then that somehow proves their virtue, because morality is so inherently linked to victimhood. Of course, one could say that the idea that morality is inherently linked to victimhood is either Christian or at the very least a heretical reading of Christianity.
Well, it's funny. This is the classic Nietzsche critique of Christianity. And there's something to it. I don't think it's essential, but there is something to this. Like the weaker I am, the more I lose, the more holy I am. I mean, that basically seems to be the model. One of the reasons I appreciate like rethinking even the Bible, for instance, if you take the heroes of the Old Testament, you'll take Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and David and all these things, and the message that you get in Sunday school is that they were these weak people, they were sinful, and God used them to accomplish His will. But if you actually read it, they were strong, they were independent. They actually had a heroic element to them. And the Bible describes them as being very wealthy. I mean, the people he chose, like Abraham was basically a king. Job was a king. I mean, these were warrior leaders who had thousands of slaves, and they had, massive amounts of sheep and cattle and like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres. These were the men that God chose. And, there's this spirit in Western literature that we should honor the heroes. And I think the Bible is actually consistent with that. Whereas a lot of today's understanding of the Bible is that the Bible is all about the weakness glorified, the weakness made holy, but it's actually not. All the heroes in the Bible, they were chads. I mean, they like one of them wrestled with God and defeated God. I mean, the angel, like he wrestled the angel and defeated him. And that's how it describes these men. I mean, these were men of courage and bravery, and they were very wealthy men. That's
what Israel itself, that's what Israel means, right? One who wrestles with God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Jacob, who had his name changed to Israel. So it's like, we need to completely deconstruct left-wing Christianity and re-understand what the Bible actually says if we're going to properly understand Christianity. And I think that we need to abandon this weak version, this like self-pious, I've been beaten down, and so therefore I'm more holy than anyone else. And that just has to end. You actually should become strong. This is like the message that Stephen Wolfe says, is like, he'll critique pastors for being overweight, because weakness is actually not a virtue. Weakness is something that exposes your unwillingness to pursue discipline and to enhance your body and to honor it in a way that God wants. And so I think that this sort of muscular Christianity, as my friend Zach Garris says, this masculine Christianity has to be part of our return. We have to abandon the type of Christianity that Nietzsche criticized, because he was right that the weak Christianity it's going to die out.
Well, certainly Stonewall Jackson would agree with you. And by the way, I mean, most of Victorian England, I mean, when you look at the British Empire at its height, I mean, they explicitly used that term, muscular Christianity. This was, politicians would speak this way. This was how they justified doing what they did, and they didn't have any apologies about it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find it, I mean, obviously there's been a lot of, when you were talking about overweight pastors, I was reminded of some of the stuff that Mark Driscoll used to say. He was like this Calvinist pastor, but he would always go after weak pastors and say, if you have a bunny rabbit like leading the men of God, you can't be surprised that it's not getting anywhere. But you also see a lot of these sort of like coups that are happening within these churches and denominations and everything else, certainly with the Southern Baptists themselves. There's all sorts of fights within that organization. They condemn the alt-right by name, champion Black Lives Matter, all these sorts of things. But one thing that you could say about the Protestants, which the Catholics unfortunately just can't, is there's not really a central governing organization that can impose this stuff. I mean, any given church, if you have a woke takeover of your denomination, you can just leave and say that these guys are heretics and we're not. And so in some sense, I think that's why the evangelicals, and I know people like to rip on them all the time and everything else, but I fundamentally believe that in the bulwark theory, that the white evangelicals are sort of like the one thing holding the country from completely going off the deep end. And if people doubt that, if you actually did get the rapture and they all went away, I think we'd be in a really bad way really fast. And it's because they're independent. It's because there's nobody who can like tell them, no, you have to accept this bad stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's like the paradox of the current age, whereas like, tradcasts who I actually like appreciate, I actually appreciate them. I'm very open with those guys, but they critique, evangelicals of doing, constant splits and all that. And there's something to that. And maybe it undermined the stability and unity of like European civilization. Might be something to that. But in our current environment, it is very useful that we can go start a new church from time to time, that we can defend ourselves in that way. On the other hand, there's something to be said about the fact that it may have spoiled us, so that like my friend and I were talking about school choice the other day, and because conservatives always have this like run to the hills mentality, where like schools will have this like left-wing anti-white or anti-Christian or whatever, anti-Western civilization curriculum, conservatives will just kind of bow out and homeschool. That's great for your family. Like I homeschool my kids. On the other hand, it basically gave all the institutions to the left. And so the fact that we have that maybe has spoiled us. And if we had not been able to do that, we would have had to fight in the arena. and fighting in the arena means we could have won and we could have imposed our will. And so like there is a sort of paradox, there's a give and take. There's something to be said about the fact that we actually do need to get involved. So we talk about things like school choice is a great example, but like maybe right now, instead of pursuing school choice and having everyone run away, we need to get more involved and reshape the curriculum and actually teach the students that we are good, that America is good, that it's worth preserving, that we should restore a positive view of our own ancestors, not only the founders, but the pre-founders and Andrew Jackson and James Polk, who I have a portrait of right here. It's like, these are our heroes, and we need to shape the American mind, and that means we can't always be running away. So while it is good for the time being, because there's a left-wing hegemony in the culture, it is nice to be able to carve things out for ourselves. On the other hand, we have got to get involved, because if we run away forever, we'll disappear.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I suppose this gets to the whole question of accelerationism or something like that, that people will only do stuff once their avenues of escape are cut off. And obviously there's a great deal to be said for that position. But of course, the counter would be that if people don't have a realistic path forward to victory, not like take up arms and but like something people can actually do, like a real plan, they don't react by becoming more radicalized. They react by essentially dropping out, becoming a defeatist. And certainly, I mean, again, if you look at practically all the denominations other than, I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to churches, but I think in many ways they're the most illustrative example of how politics actually works. Aside from the evangelicals, if you look at what happened to all these mainline denominations, which once defined American culture, like that's what American culture was. It was basically mainline Protestantism.
Yeah.
They got taken over by these insane radicals, and everybody just kind of said, okay, and left. And it just, that was it. I mean, there was never really a pushback, aside from maybe the occasional breakaway denomination like the Anglicans from the Episcopalians. But you could argue about how effective that's even been.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think that that has been the strategy for a long time. And it's like, man, we've lost, I don't know, 150 years, 100 years of ground by doing that all the time. Should we get back in and try to infiltrate? And I think we need to kind of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. I mean, some people need to separate, build new churches, like be a light for people to come, for families to come and to, go to a new church outside of, like an elder situation that's like thoroughly subverted. Some of that's good. I also think you need some people that are willing to do power plays, that are willing to get involved, get their hands dirty, engage in the messiness of church and government politics. That's good as well. And so I'm someone that appreciates people who get involved and, compromise, but at least to enter the arena. That's fine. I want both. I don't think that we should have, a one or the other. For some people, they need to start new institutions. For other people, they need to get involved and try to subvert or like do a counter subversion. That's probably not possible in a lot of churches, like the Anglican Church, probably not possible. Is it possible in like the SBC and the Southern Baptist Convention? Yeah, it's very possible. And I know a lot of good guys that are doing a lot of good work to push back. There was a resolution about like diversity resolution or something, and they got resoundingly defeated by a group of young guys. And it's like, okay, that's good. That's really good. That normalizes our cause.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was at WorldNet Daily, and this was like a long time ago, but that was like my first experience really seeing like the politics within evangelical America. And there is this sort of conflict going on over the ownership of these key institutions. And this kind of brings us to the main point. Whatever grand ideological critiques people have about stuff, and this doesn't just apply to churches, but to politics, to America generally, most people, normal people, don't like the idea of choosing something radically new. They like the old familiar names. And this is why, generally speaking, if you are in a denomination, if you're in a state, if you're within the GOP, whatever, if you've got some sort of a toehold within a traditional institution, you should probably fight like hell to hold on to it. Because if you try to start something totally new, it's going to be that much more difficult to get a hearing. So given that, thinking about in terms of politics and where we began, do you think we're at a point now where people with, say, your kinds of views, more or less openly expressed, could start winning elections. Maybe not at the level of a congressman, but something as simple to do the things that we were talking about with curriculum, like Board of Education in a local election, city council. Because it seems to me that for all the talk about rising white racial consciousness and how we need to go beyond Trump and build this new right and everything else, there's still not one pro-white elected official in the entire country. So what are we talking about?
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and this is kind of the transition point where, at first you're bad to even think it. Now you can think it. Now you can kind of implicitly do things. Like denaturalization is like implicitly, like it has the ramifications, but man, like the Zoomers, they have no filter. Like their time is coming. Like it's inevitable, and so our role is to basically just be that bridge, just to be somewhere that continues to normalize them, help build them up and help them get into politics. But yeah, time is coming. And there are a lot of open seats. There's a lot of power that you can have at the local level, for sure. I am someone that believes that the future kind of belongs to the executive at the federal level.
Me too.
I was telling someone the other day, like, I think Congress is basically going to descend into like squabbling nonsense. And the executive is going to do things like seize the massive oil, supply in Venezuela, sell it, and give himself a budget because he doesn't have time to wait for the Congress and the Senate to allocate funds to him. I think that there's going to be a massive power play at the executive level, and Congress is basically going to become functionally irrelevant. So I think that the executive at the federal level is important, but at the local level, and by the way, the local level is run on executive branch giveaways. That's how it's run. It's all administrative state stuff. So if you can get down and you can receive the funds, you can control the buckets that are getting this federal money. That's where the play is. And so I agree with you. And if you want to do something, there are like run for Board of Education. I don't have any kids in public school. Doesn't matter. Run for Board of Education. Like those are the types of things that we need. Even like road commissars and stuff, like controlling things like, zoning. Like you'd be surprised. Like, so we were, friends online and I were talking about hypothetically, like the ruthless application of cleanliness laws on gas stations. Well, what kind of effect is that going to have on gas station owners? And are gas station owners the type of people that we want denaturalized, or the type of people that we want to remain here? And so it's like, look, the existing law is there. You just have a bureaucrat come in with like a 200-point checklist and like you could shut down his business. All you're doing is applying the law. It's like these things are ripe for our mobilization and our weaponization.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm getting kind of annoyed with people sort of, oh, well, if we just kind of do nothing, things will work in our interest somehow. It's like, dude, there's so much just there. It's just sitting there. just take it. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think frustrates people, in fairness, especially younger people, is that there does seem to be this resistance by, let's be blunt, boomers, especially in things like local Republican Party groups, conservative groups, whatever, where they don't want to pass the torch. Right. They see younger people come in, and this even applies to the churches to some extent too. I mean, certainly within the Catholic churches, which I can speak to, there's almost like an anger that these younger guys are coming in and want to like revitalize the group, and there's sort of this idea of like, no, we want to kind of decline slowly because that's better. And of course, the danger is if you look at something like the Republican Party, say, a lot of people are assuming that when Trump is done, and we are nearing the end of the Trump era because he can't serve anymore, he's not going to run for another term, whatever people might think. They think that like somebody to his right is going to replace them, when in actual fact, it seems like most of the Republican Party, at least the people who run things, want to go back to Mitt Romney, to go back to like maybe even worse than Mitt Romney, basically go to somebody like Senator John Curtis in Utah or somebody like that. And this is, of course, the great danger, is that we're stuck in this position. And I think this is the frustration of many young people, where on the right, dealing with normal conservatives, so often it seems like our job is to save these people from themselves, which can be very psychologically draining after a while. How do you deal with that? Or am I being too cynical?
No, I think
I've been accused of that.
Yeah, like normalcy bias is a thing, but I would just say like the boomers, and look, like this is an attack. It's really an attack on the boomer archetype, right? Like, but they are singularly focused on retirement and leisure, and just like they just want to drift off in peace. And anything that upsets that, like even seeing you engage in a life of activism, is something that challenges their own addiction to rest, to relaxation. They want so bad to fulfill the promises that they thought they were fighting for in their 30s and 40s. And people have a really depoliticized mind. They think that all political engagement is more of a soap opera than an actual existential fight. And I think that's the problem, is that like if you hear that the soap opera is actually going to affect the well-being of your children, you just kind of want to psychologically opt out. You don't want to deal with it. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people are not. I mean, look, things are hard right now, and I don't think things are going to get much better. I mean, they're economically difficult for a lot of people. All the hype about like the headline numbers and stats and jobs and all that stuff. We all know in our real life, day-to-day situation that it is tough out there right now, and people want an escape. And now is not the time to escape, because it's we can't afford to, because the future is going to depend on those who act now. I mean, the future is determined by those who show up, right? That's the phrase. And I think that there's a sort of guilt that enters a lot of like conservative mind where they don't want to do anything, and so they get mad at those who do. So I think there's some of that. Like, I spend a lot of time, all my time, thinking about this, and people will say things like, you're just obsessing over it. Why don't you have a real life? It's like, look, politics is upstream of a normal life. Politics is the foundation. If you don't defeat the enemy, your children will not have a normal life. Like, we live in this bubble. If you look at the last millennia, politics had to be worked out. The enemy had to be defeated before the posterity could benefit from it. One of the blessings of America is that our forefathers fought the enemies. Those enemies could have come from Europe in some ways. They could have come from Mexico. They could have been natives on the land. But wherever the case, they had to deal with the situation before their posterity could benefit.
Right. One last point before we kind of talk about more general closing remarks, but obviously one of the big fights right now, specifically within the evangelical community, would be about Zionism and about Israel. And certainly as somebody who, used to work for a website like this, I would go to these churches and you'd see them waving Israeli flags. A lot of them were actually messianic. I don't even know if you'd call them Christian. You call them Messianic Jews or something like that, but not Jews ethnically. I mean, pretty diverse ethnically. But they would celebrate blood and soil nationalism for these people, and it was seen as legitimate. So the premise itself has been accepted that like, nationalism is okay, but it's not accepted for themselves. On the other hand, I'm saying this from Lynchburg, Virginia, if you're thinking in terms of rank and file conservatives who you can more or less trust to have your back on things like immigration enforcement and standing up against moral decay and these sorts of things, whatever you may say about them, the type of people who believe those things are probably going to be Zionists. They're probably going to be pro-Israel. And so you're sort of forced in this situation where if you want the one thing, you're going to have to accept the other if you're going to be part of a political coalition. Do you think that this is something that we just kind of have to outwait? Or do you think that this is something that has to be dealt with now? Because obviously with the Iran war, this is the thing that's tearing apart the online right, even if the polls suggest that most Republican voters are still with the president on this.
Yeah, I have, I'm someone who at least tries to be like extremely realist, and I really want what is in the best interests of us at all times. And I've long been a critic of our relationship with Israel and their role in dominating and steering our foreign policy. I think that that's been true since Pat Buchanan, since the 80s. I'm a huge critic of it. On the other hand, I'm someone who's open to pausing certain tensions to deal with others. And so like for instance, in the first bombing, I think it was last year in Iran, it was in Iran again. There was talk about like the big beautiful bill being like a deal where like if we bombed Iran, we would get the BBB passed. I'm like, in principle, I don't know if that was actually true, but in principle, I'm not opposed to stuff like that, because like Israel knows that it's actually losing the narrative war. Israel's power in America depends on its evangelical base, and its evangelical base is basically leaving dispensationalism. And dispensationalism is the view that there's this like biblical grant to Israel to have the access to the land and all that stuff. Right. Christians are abandoning that view of Israel, modern day Israel, having any connection with ancient Israel, and even ancient Israel having any present day significance. But since they're abandoning that, Israel is kind of like panicking. And so they're kind of like taking what they can get because they know that their days are numbered. So in terms of the long term, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a right and a left that are both disinterested in helping Israel, and Israel kind of knows it. And so in the meantime, they're in a position of weakness. They have been in a position of strength, but the American population, at least over the next 10 to 20 years, is really going to start working against them. So I don't mind doing things that benefit us. Like, for instance, I am a strong critic of getting involved in Iran, for sure. But if they said, look, can you bomb these two cities and we'll pass the SAVE Act? I'd weigh that. In principle, like I'm okay with deal making and things like that. But I don't think Zionism is sustainable. I don't think it's going to last very long. I think we're going to go through a period of like intense cancel culture against Christians and other right wingers who are more critical of that relationship. So in the long term, I'm not worried about it. But I believe that we always have to be realists about it and be willing to make deals, be willing to tolerate certain things, just to kind of survive and also build our coalition and get things that we want out of politics.
I guess the last question, because this kind of gets to the heart of people with the whole question of deal making. Are we even in a position to make a deal if we don't have an independent political force? Because to some extent, I mean, that's really what we're talking about with the new organization and everything else, the idea of whites having a collective political voice. Because until we have that, we don't command any votes, we don't command any elected officials, we don't command any money, we can't make a deal. And, to some extent, when we talk about these sorts of things, it's all abstractions because we're not actually at the table. The point is to actually be at the table. Do you think, what do you realistically hope to achieve in terms of getting us to the table over, say, the next 5 years? Because, and obviously a lot depends on how the future elections go and everything else, but it does seem like it's really all going to be decided in like the next decade. Like there is a time limit here, both here and in Europe.
I agree with that. I've been really discouraged, like a lot of us have, about 2028 or 2020 this year and the midterms this year and 2028 presidential, because things do not look well for the Republicans. And I think that the next few election cycles, because here's the thing, people like Stephen Miller are entirely correct that if they lose in 28, they're going to jail. Like they are going to, the establishment. And when I say the establishment, I mean the GOP leadership and the Democratic Party. They want a Stephen Miller or someone like that to never get into anywhere near power ever again. And they will go to great lengths, as you're seeing in Virginia right now. They're going to go to great lengths to make sure that there is zero right-wing influence in Washington. So I'm entirely outraged at the Republican Congress for not getting the SAVE Act passed, for not approving people like Jeremy Carl. Like, what are they even doing? Like this is absurd, because yes, it is existential. And I know for decades, people have said this is the most important election, but we are at the end game here if we don't win something.
Yeah, it's actually true now. Like every election actually is the most important election of all time. Like that's bad, but that's how it is.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, Stephen Miller will be in jail, and there are others like him. I know that there are staffers in Washington in general that are very good. There are guys, and they will be in big trouble if we don't win. And it's not because they did something wrong, obviously. It's because they upset the regime and they challenged the regime, and they're starting to normalize things that the regime sees as a threat to its own existence. And like a beaten dog, the regime is going to shore itself up and protect itself. They're not going to let the actual populist response to the malfeasance, come into being. They're just not going to let it happen. So I do think that the next few years are crucially important in terms of whether we even are in a power to make deals. I think it's very limited. I think we had a better chance 1 year ago than we do now. I think we've been weakened over the last 18 months. So we just have to look for opportunities to make those deals and to grow ourselves. We have to be extremely prudent. I would also say one more thing, to the right wing online. We have to stop getting engaged in petty fights. Like, if you agree with Stephen Miller, if you don't agree with Stephen Miller, stop fighting. Even the Iran thing, I think it's completely legitimate to express your opinion one way or the other, but we cannot fracture over it. We have to stay united against the left and against the center, because that's the only thing that's going to give us another day of breath.
Agreed 100% on that. Well, CJ, thank you so much. You've really gone into a lot of the topics, and I think a lot of the more profound issues that people have with some of the movements that you're a part of and some of the ideas you're talking about. I think you've really met every single objection very well. And I really encourage people to look into everything you're doing, and especially wish you a lot of luck with this new project. But I got to say, I'm almost overwhelmed by how many different things you're involved in. So when I tell people, where can they find you, this is going to be a long one because you're doing a lot of different things at once.
Yeah. So, well, my Twitter is the best way to just follow me, at Contra Mordor. And the website for the advocacy group is WCAP. Or WCA Project, so White Civil Advocacy Project, WCAproject.com. Go there. It's very much going to be, we're thinking of it as an NAACP for whites. We have a right to apply existing non-discrimination initiatives, corporate standards, civil rights stuff. We want to apply that to ourselves, as we've been beaten down by it for so long, but I think we want to use it in our defense. And so we're going to see what happens with that. But it's been getting a lot of traction. I would advise you to go to the site, see if you can get involved. We want it to be a very serious advocacy group. There's going to be a legal arm. There's obviously going to be a research arm. There's going to be, a political or a politically adjacent arm. But these are all things that we have to do. We have to muscle every single piece of resource that we have at our disposal and fight for our right to keep fighting. So that's the WCAproject.com. And then I have a podcast, which is actually more catered to Protestant, Christians, but that's Contra Mundum. I'm working on a project here in Tennessee where we're basically bringing in families and businesses and trying to just kind of foster a healthy community for people that are fleeing increasingly totalitarian blue states. So you're welcome to look that up. I don't work for them or anything, but they're my friends. Ridge Runner is the company. I'm starting an American-owned gas station right here in Tennessee, so there'll be more announcements about that this fall. So I stay busy, but Contra Mordor is the best place to find me. So.
Well, I appreciate everything you're doing. And if everybody was working as hard as you were, I think we'd be in a much better place. So thank you so much for joining us and everything you're doing. I encourage everybody to check out this new project, because until we develop a white political voice, a collective white political consciousness, we're all just kind of kidding ourselves. And this is step one. So, regional elections in France earlier this week, the LFI, we've talked about them before. This is the far-left party that was implicated in the killing of a young Catholic activist, Canton. They overperformed in regional elections. Recognize where we are. They overperformed. They did better than expected. Two quick videos that I think show where we're at. First, we have this guy, Bali Bagayoko. He is now the new mayor of Saint-Denis. This city is the home of the royal necropolis. As such, it is the final resting place of the kings of France. Well, now it is known as something else.
Tout à l'heure sur ce plateau, il y en a qui rappelaient que évidemment Saint-Denis c'était la ville des rois. Aujourd'hui, c'est toujours la ville des rois, mais c'est aussi la ville où il y a beaucoup de gens.
So, if you didn't catch that just then, the anchor identifies Saint-Denis as the city of the kings. We called that in the past, to which the new mayor says no, it's the city of the blacks. And he's right. You can complain about that. You can say, no, well, it's France. It's forever the city of the kings. Oh. No. If they take ownership of it, it's theirs. And it's blood and soil nationalism for them. It is conquest. That is what it is. Recognize where we are. This is what defines the split between right and left in Western politics. You want Western civilization, which is to say white civilization, you want that to continue, you're on the right. You want it conquered by nons, you're on the left. It really is that simple. Another clip.
Non, mais c'est la nouvelle
Pas
France
nouveau,
contre la France
c'est
blanche.
même un peu des magots, mais enfin bon.
C'est des magots, mais
on va relativiser par là, quoi, par
la
le
partition
contenu.
idéologique, elle est là, Jean-Michel. On va pas faire semblant de pas voir. C'est la nouvelle France contre la France blanche. Donc, ce qui s'installe là, c'est le débat, excusez-moi, de la présidentielle.
Again, how much effort is put into denying what's right before our eyes? I mean, I like this one a lot. The one guy's like, well, it's a little demagogic to put it in these terms, right? Like, it's a little bit inflammatory to say it's this simple. And the woman goes, no, it's the new France versus white France. That's what it is. You can like it or not, but that's what it is. Well, actually, it's really complicated. No, it's not. And of course, the new France, the so-called new France, it's not France at all. It's just foreign invaders. And that's the point. Now, I don't want to end on a black pill with you guys. This is not the bleak pill. We're going to end with a white pill. The National Rally, which is the Nationalist Party, well, it's not right-wing enough. Yeah, none of us are. I mean, we win when we get put up against the wall for being too left-wing. National Rally is not right-wing enough, but it's what we've got. And it's what's there. And they actually overperformed in these elections as well. This shows that the center is gone. France 24 reports, French far-right eyes Marseille upset after strong showing in mayoral elections. Quote, the French far-right's steady ascent cleared another milestone on Sunday as Marine Le Pen's National Rally posted its best ever results in the first round of municipal elections seen as a test of its presidential ambitions. Incumbent Louis Alliot was comfortably re-elected in Perpignan, the only city with a population above 100,000 the party already ran. The National Rally candidates also led the first round in Toulon and were neck and neck with the left in Nimes and Marseille, France's second largest city. The party's president, Jordan Bardella, said voters expressed a deep desire for change and appealed for more backing in the second round on March 22nd. In 7 days, your vote can change the face of many French towns. Change isn't waiting for 2022. It starts next Sunday, unquote. Now, this is ultimately where all politics is going. I mean, there essentially is no center anymore. It's all just going to be right and left. And increasingly, when you look at young people, when they say, oh, they're going to the right, they're going to the left, and I understand that there's a sexual difference in terms of the way young men and young women are going, but a lot of this is just racial. When people say like, oh, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, whatever, is going to the left, the non-whites are. The whites are going to the right. I mean, it's nationalism. It's not even nationalism versus anti-nationalism. It's nationalism for us versus nationalism for them. It is that simple. But the problem is this. There is a time limit to this. It is just a question of demographics. It's a race between white France, which is to say actual France, waking up, or the so-called new France simply swamping and taking over. And it's the same race everywhere. It's the same in Britain, it's the same in Germany, it's the same in America. And we may not like discussing this in such simplistic terms. We may want to think of some more complicated model to explain what's going on, but it actually is very simple. It's just us versus them. And it always has been, and it always will be. All politics is identity politics. I'm Kevin DeAnna. We'll talk again real soon. All right, guys, that's it for today's episode of Identity Politics. If you found this valuable and you want to see more of this kind of work, here's how you can help. First, follow the show and share it with people who need to hear it. We're on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, TikTok, and you can also grab the RSS feed. Sharing it is the fastest way for us to grow. Second, sign up for our email list so we can always stay in direct contact no matter what the platforms decide. And most importantly, if you believe in our mission and want to keep it going, please consider supporting us on Ko-Fi. You can donate once or subscribe at the bronze, silver, gold, or white level. Every contribution, big or small, helps keep Identity Politics independent and alive. All the links are in the description below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting. We'll see you next time.